There's going to be a lot of opinions about who you are. You're going to have opinions yourself about who you are. But this is who you really are. You are my child. You are my beloved. Just who you are makes me joyful, says the voice. And so he will now come into this time of wilderness. What does this mean to be God's child? What are the implications of being God's agent of love in the world? What does it mean to then live that out and to speak truth to power, to stand up against injustice? What is it going to mean for him to welcome people who have been outcasts and to heal people who have been denied access to healing in the past? What is it going to mean to the established status quo to have a true daughter or son of God show up? He understands where this always goes. It goes to a cross. And from the beginning of his ministry, he can see the trajectory towards the end of his earthly time. He understands that to be a child of God means to walk the way of a Messiah of self-sacrificial love that will end in capital punishment at the hands of the empire. You're just too dangerous for us to have around. And so, in that realization, he is tested. It says that the Satan, the shaitan in Hebrew scriptures, the same shaitan that spoke to Job and tested Job, is now going to test Jesus. And I want you to be really clear, noting how does he always begin his tests? If you are God's son. I mean, shouldn't there be benefits if you are God's son, as hungry as you are? Then command these stones to become bread. How about just using a little bit of that magic dust for yourself? How about exploiting just a little? I mean, creature comforts aren't bad, right? You could chalk it up to eliminating hunger. Just make these stones into bread. And then Jesus, he's ready for that one. He says, we don't live by bread alone. So then he says, well, okay, how about this one? There's no one here. If you're God's son, just bend your knee to me once with no one looking. And what I can offer you is power. We could form a significant power alliance. You could govern in a way that would not be seen before, and you could get a super PAC maybe. You could carry any debate with just a little of my help. All I'm asking you to do is, with no one looking, give a little allegiance to me. And so he says, I'm not going to do that one either. You see what these are? These are all ways in which he can use his identity as God's son for different types of power. And finally, the third one is a dangerous one. If you're God's son, then test God. Throw yourself into harm's way off the pinnacle of this temple. And if you do it, I mean, notice here, by the way, the devil loves to quote Scripture. It says in Scripture that God's going to fix you up. God's not going to let anything bad happen to God's people. Isn't that what God always... By the way, that's the heart of the prosperity gospel, is that God takes care of God's own and not anybody else. And apparently these people haven't read the Gospels or the rest of Scripture, because it seems like a job requirement of being a follower of God is sometimes finding yourself in a lot of trouble. And so Jesus rejects that one too. And then it says that devil left until a more opportune time. And Luke's Gospel is the only one that's going to tell us when that opportune time is. When the devil enters into another mind of that of Judas Iscariot, and he betrays him. Jesus had to remember what he heard at his baptism and just hold on to it. Hold on to it. Remember who you are and whose you are. Remember your true secret identity. And that's what Lent's about for us. Now, why do we practice this time of Lent? I said, well, it's a season of real active practices that help us ground our memory. We are, as the book of James describes us, we are people who see ourselves in a mirror, and then we walk away and we forget what we look like. That's his way of describing us. And I have to admit, that's me. I can come in here and I can hear the words of the gospel. You are God's child. You are called to be an agent of God's love in the world. And then I walk out of here and I forget. I think maybe it's not about that I'm about the world, but the world's about me. And that the world owes me stuff. Maybe I should just use my whatever, flowy robes or position power to get something for myself. And so I have to come back and be reminded again and again and again. We come to worship each Sunday and we set aside a season so we can practice our memory. Our identities, my identity has slowly been stolen from me, bit by bit. And I do this willingly too. Every day in advertisements, I watch these advertisements that create a sense of lack in me. You're not whole. You're not complete until you buy this product. And then when you do, you'll know all the spiritual things you're seeking. Except then when you do, you don't. So then there's other places. Every time we watch politicians of any stripe begin to speak in this season, we hear about, you should be very afraid. There's a lack, and I'm the only one who can fix it. And so we buy into some of that too. And when we get very agitated about that with each other, I know the way that this is all going to work out for the best, and my way has got to be the right way. And some of our identity as children of God is lost in the process. And then the more insidious one. Every time the demon of self-doubt creeps in and reminds us of our own history and shames us. You, God's child, really? With your past failures? With your ongoing inner struggles? You dare to call yourself a daughter or son of God? Why don't you just go along to get along a little bit here? Why don't you not think so highly of yourself? And so we come back to the Lord's house. We come back again because we've forgotten, and we need to hear once again, no, really, you and I are sons and daughters. You and I are called and claimed and welcomed at the table. And you and I are sent out into the world to be agents and workers for justice on God's behalf. Yes, even with our failures. Yes, even with our inner struggles. In fact, maybe even because of them, we're going to be able to add a voice in this world that needs to be heard. Well, we're not the only ones who've had a memory issue. We're not the only ones who keep forgetting who we are. We go all the way back, and you hear all the way at the beginning in Deuteronomy, when the people who were wandering in the wilderness and they show up in the promised land, what are they told to do? When you get there, when you go from being wanderers to getting some real estate and setting some stakes around this is mine and then tilling that land, the first thing you're supposed to do is take some of the fruits from that, take it to the house of the Lord, put it up on the altar, and then hear what it said? You're supposed to say this: my ancestor was a wandering Aramean. My ancestor was an undocumented immigrant. My ancestor was an unwelcomed migrant worker. And furthermore, the next thing you're supposed to say is, and then we were led into a place of slavery. And in that place of slavery, God delivered us. God delivered us to a new day. And so now for me, I'm going to remember my past and remember the God who delivered me and my own history. I think that that's really important for us as a nation of immigrants. What if we were to start digging into our own immigration history? And before we have any conversations as a nation about current immigration policy, we need to talk about our own policy. Where did we come from? What was lost? in the translation from where our people came from to today, what did we have to sacrifice, and what privileges have accrued to us from being down the road a little bit? Remembering our history is going to temper our conversation together. That's what Deuteronomy was reminding God's people to do then, and I believe still today. So now, you'll notice that there's been a little architectural change for Lent. The baptismal font is out there as you walk into the entrance of the church, not here in the center as it is almost all the time. That's intentional. I want us to have this season where we walk in and walk out of the church and practice an act of remembrance. When you enter, touch your fingers to the water and make the sign of the cross on your forehead and remember who you are and whose you are. You are welcome in God's house as a beloved child. When you leave, do the same. Touch the water, make the sign of the cross, and remember that who you are and whose you are, and you are being sent into the world as God's beloved child. And when you forget, when I forget, when the identity theft of our spirit begins to erode away, then just wherever you are, stop, breathe, and remember. Amen. Our hymn of the day is I Want Jesus to Walk With Me. I invite you to stand as you're able.